Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our next guest is among Canada's first group of trained physicians in medically assisted dying, also known as MAiD. She is joined by one of North America's leading freelance journalists.
They are the authors of The Last Doctor, a memoir that explores the heart-wrenching journey of a doctor and the patients she serves in administering end-of-life care. Please welcome Dr. Jean Marmoreo and Johanna Schneller.
Welcome. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Dr. Jean, we have to start off. You're one of the first physicians in Canada to be trained in MAiD. What was your experience like entering into a field that was just becoming accessible in the country?
Yeah, when it came into being, 2016, there was no rule book. I say that to families. I say there's no rule book about how you seek an assisted death. But for practitioners and nurse practitioners at the beginning, there was no rule book for us either.
Yeah.
So we had to start from scratch. And what we did, which was really critical, is we established an online community across Canada in order to ensure that we actually did it. We did it well, and we did it to a really high standard.
So all the physicians sort of being in contact.
All online with each other.
Incredible.
Yeah, because it's province by province, and so they took it on themselves to make a national standard.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, fascinating.
Very smart.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, you speak really personally about the 7 patients that are named in this book. And specifically, you all write about Yolanda Martins, who you decided to dedicate this book to. What compelled you to share all of these stories particularly?
There are 7 patient stories that I selected, that we would sort of work together. Yolanda's a special case, but every one of these stories, they're real people. We actually went back and interviewed all the families after 5 years to see what was the outcome. But every one of these people had lessons to teach me that I needed to know. And I didn't know at the time necessarily, but over time I realized that these 7 patients really were important in terms of what I had to learn to provide people with an assisted death.
Now, Johanna, many of us have been reading your work for many years, from Premier Magazine to the Globe and Mail, but this topic is one that really is quite unique and special. So what was your experience with The Last Doctor, working with Dr. Jean and interviewing the families along these very emotional journeys?
Yeah, I mean, I love a good story, so that's the impetus. And Jean's husband and my husband went to high school together.
Oh, wow.
So I'd been hearing her stories as she learned how to do all this and sort of embarked on this kind of self-study. And Ian and I, my husband and I, would have dinner with them, and I would be like, you know this is a book, you know this is a book. And then finally, Jean said, okay, you should go meet Yolanda, who is the only person I met while she was still alive. Everybody else was families that we talked to after the fact. And Yolanda was only 45, but she'd been sick for 30 years. And she was a statistician, she was a medical professional, she knew all her reasons. And she was a really perfect first person for me to talk to, because we had these long philosophical, moral conversations. And she felt very strongly that she didn't want it to just be an article, that she wanted to be part of a book, a larger group of people. And so that was finally, when I finally met Yolanda, that was how I finally convinced Jean, who Jean has many strengths, but one of them is not loving to talk about herself. So it was really Yolanda who convinced us to do it together.
Dr. Jean, if anybody's been following this in the news, they know that the latest news is that MAiD laws are starting next March, where Canadians with a mental health illness can now be listed, it can be listed as their sole condition to be eligible for assisted dying. It's a big step. I want to hear your thoughts on this evolution.
It's actually in the legislature. It will happen in March 2023. So it has created a lot of controversy. We've been giving this tremendous amounts of kind of thought, sharing a lot of kind of ideas about it. But to think that somebody with, and it's not mental illness, we all have mental illness at times, believe me, but it is about mental disorders. So it must meet the DSM-5 classification of a mental disorder. There are 137 of them. But to say that somebody with a mental disorder does not have the rights of any Canadian to ask for an assisted death if they meet the criteria. So assisted death is not a dial-a-death process. There are eligibility criteria. They are rigorous. You have 2 assessors. Whether a psychiatrist gets added into this milieu, whether we start with a prospective review committee, there's going to be a lot of kind of thought and energy put into how this should look and what it should provide for Canadians and what it should actually be for the world too, in terms of how to do this correctly and properly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to stress is that nobody undertakes this lightly, not the families, not the patients, not the doctors. And I think there's a little bit of panic out there when laws change and things get complicated. But I would really like to reassure people that, you know, these doctors are the ones who have to walk into the room and do this procedure. And none of them is ever going to make somebody do something they don't want to do. So everybody can just relax. They're in good hands. And the process is a very long, thoughtful process.
Yeah.
Dr. Jean, why is it important for you to educate more people about MAiD and inform them on the positives of the medically assisted dying?
It's really an excellent point, because we are so adverse to talking about death and dying. We are really a death-avoiding culture. But I think there was a wonderful comedy show that said we need to talk about how we talk about dying. And that's really the message that has to be given. People need to be able to talk about it. And so one of the things you say is not, for a lot of people, how long do you go on, but how you go on long. And what does a good day look like? And what is the value you want to kind of have? What is your legacy? What are your memories? What do you want to be able to say to people before you sort of take, you know, your last breath, knowing that you actually can control that you actually may have the power to say, I will choose this day as the end of my life, and I will finish my life, and I will pass on and tell my kids what I need to tell them. And it's always a combination of look after one another and be kind. And you hear it over and over again. I hear it many, many times. Look after one another, be kind.
Beautiful. Perfect. Beautiful. Dr. Jean, Johanna, thank you both. We're just scratching the surface on this topic that I think the whole country, the whole world needs to be talking about. So thank you both for being here. Thank you. The book is entitled The Last Doctor. It is out now. Everyone in our studio audience, you're going home with your copy today. We'll be right back right after this.
Hey there, wasn't that great? Do you know where you can find some equally good content? Our YouTube page. It's filled with discussions, debates, and some laughs. Head there now, like and subscribe.